Japanese culture on the whole is an expression of Zen. Antaiji grows its own rice, its own vegetables. You have to learn how to cook, and you have to learn to cook in a way that pleases the Japanese. The Japanese students, they need a lot of attention. In Buddhism, we talk about letting go of yourself. Everything seems to change. The whole world seems to change. It's not about you.
Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today we welcome Muho. Thank you very much for coming. Muho, you're a Zen monk, former abbott of Antaiji, and you're originally from Germany and came here many, many years ago to kind of practice Zen and teach Zen. And we want to learn more about your experience as this. I usually start our conversations by asking what brought you to Japan, but I want to start this time with asking you, how did you get into Buddhism and maybe specifically Zen?
Probably it has to do with the fact that my mother died when I was 7 years old. And from that age, when I just had entered elementary school, I asked myself, well, if we all die, why do we live in the first place? And when I asked my father, he said, ask the teachers in school. And when I asked the teachers in school, they said in elementary school, it's still too early. Wait until you go to high school. So at that age, I already got the impression that even the grown-ups don't really know the meaning of life. And when I asked my friends, they looked surprised. Strange things you talk about. Let's play soccer together. But I was never really, into playing soccer or anything. I wanted to know why we are here. But nobody could answer me. And at age 16, I entered a boarding school, and there happened to be a teacher who was into meditation, Zen. And I had never heard about that. I wasn't really interested in religion or meditation or anything. So when he asked me if I would want to participate, I said, no, thank you. It was the time where Bhagwan was in the news and transcendental meditation and people that claimed that they could levitate. So I thought it's kind of something like dubious. 2 or 3 weeks later, he came for a second time because there were not many students in that meditation class. And he asked for a second time, and I was even more suspicious. Already the second time. I said, I have no interest in that. And he would then ask me, well, have you tried? And I said, no, of course not. And I have no intention to do so. And then he said, well, if you never tried, how can you say you're not interested? So I let myself be convinced to try it at least once, and then I thought I would stop. But as the result of that one time, I'm sitting here now. So something made me come over and over again. And today I would say that first time when I said it was a discovery of my body. I knew, of course, that I have this body, but if you had asked me, where are you, who are you, I would have pointed to my head. The brain in here, that's probably me. And I only need my lungs to supply the brain with oxygen. I need the heart to pump the blood in my body. But for example, in school, I would sit kind of like Rodin's thinker, or I would sit leaning back on my chair. And sometimes the teachers would say, hey boy, do something about your posture. And I would say, well, as long as I listen to what you say and I have good points in the tests, who cares about my posture? So in Zen, it was for the first time that I realized that when my posture changes, somehow everything seems to change. The whole world seemed to change. And of course, 16 years I had been breathing, and I knew I need to breathe to be alive, but I never felt the breath. And in Zazen, I was surprised at something as close to as my breath. Normally I don't realize it, but then it's there. Or there's this bird that had been probably singing all day since the morning, but for the first time I hear that bird. That was the big discovery in the beginning. How small my world was. How selected my
experience
was of the world, yeah. And then I started to read books, because after a year the teacher quit the school and he told me, why don't you continue as the kind of responsible person of that meditation circle. So then I thought I need to know something about Buddhism, about Zen, Japanese Zen. And I started to read books by D.T. Suzuki and about Buddhism. I learned about that prince that 2,500 years ago in India, although he was supposed to become the king, left the palace and looked for, well, the reason of suffering. He claimed famously, life is suffering, the later Buddha. And a lot of people don't agree with that. They say, well, life is so beautiful. How can he say that? But he spoke out of my heart in a way. For 16 years almost, well, 9 years, since the age of 7, I thought I was the only one who kind of asked for the meaning of life. And then I realized I wasn't the only one. The people for a long time had been dealing with this question, struggling with this question, why do we suffer and what can we do about it? And well, they say that the Buddha, sitting under the so-called Bodhi tree one morning, saw the morning star and found the answer. And then his teaching and this practice of meditation came from India to China, and from China 800 years ago, it arrived in the form of Zen in Japan. So when I heard that I knew, I was 16, 17 at the time, I knew I want to go to Japan and practice it there in the home country, so to speak.
So your original contact actually with Buddhism was not directly with the religious aspect of it, but more just the meditation practice. And that kind of got you curious to learn more, and you found that you need to go to Japan.
Exactly.
Did you then come directly to Japan to practice Buddhism in a religious way? Or what was your journey then from that moment you decided to go to how you actually came?
Well, at age 17, I thought I want to go to Japan, and at first I thought right after high school I would go. But when I visited the teacher who had already left the school at the time and told him about my dream, I want to go to Japan, I want to practice it, to really spend my life. Although he had talked me into it, he said, wait a minute. Maybe you should first go to university, study Japanese, get some other license so that you can later get a job, because who knows if you're still going to be that enthusiastic in 3 years, in 5 years. And at the time, it was the time of the economic bubble, so if you could speak Japanese, probably you would get a job in trading or whatever. And he talked me into going to university first, but in Germany, you graduate from high school in the summer and you can enter university either in October or in April. So I decided to spend the time until October in Japan. For 3 months, I went to Tochigi-ken, which is a little bit north of Tokyo, and I did a homestay there. And I had this wish to, learn something about Buddhism Zen. But the family where I did homestay happened to be a Japanese Christian family. So they looked forward to having this kid from Germany, the country of Luther, while I was longing to learn something about Buddhism. And when I asked them, because I'd read in the books of D.T. Suzuki that basically Japanese culture on the whole is an expression of Zen, like tea ceremony, flower arrangement, or all of the martial arts. And so I thought if I could listen to shakuhachi music, that would give me an idea of Zen. So I asked the father of that homestay family, can you at least play me some shakuhachi music? And then he put a record on the record player, but it was Beethoven's Ninth what's it called? Symphony. The Ninth Symphony. So for a lot of Japanese, that's the true music. While for me, I thought Zen, shakuhachi, flower ceremony, whatever. So when I was, at that time I was 19, I just graduated high school. It was before I entered university. I spent 2 months in Utsunomiya, and then I hitchhiked to Kyoto and visited all the beautiful temples there. You pay maybe 500 yen to see the stone gardens and stuff like that. But I couldn't find a temple where you could actually practice together with the monks. I was a little bit disappointed about that, but then I went back to university, studied Japanese, and the next time I came was in 1990, the first time 1987. And 1990 I came for 1 year as an exchange student, and I studied in Kyoto, and I looked around in Kyoto again, but I couldn't find a place where you could practice daily. Maybe once a month or twice a month. They had some Zazen meeting that was open to the public. But when I looked for a temple where you could practice daily, I found a Soto. So in Zen, there's two schools, Rinzai, Soto. And in Kyoto, especially, Rinzai is strong. But I happened to find a small Soto temple outside of Kyoto where I could practice more intensively. And there I heard about Antaiji for the first time in the summer of 1990. Then I decided to go there for the remaining 6 months of my exchange student program. So that was from the autumn of 1990 to the spring of 1991. And then I went back to Germany to finish my university studies. And in 1993, I came for good. So basically for the last 31 years, I stayed in Japan. Most of the time in Antaiji, but since 4 years ago, I'm living in Osaka.
So you went to Antaiji, which is a temple in the outskirts of Kyoto, Hyogo prefecture, so not too far from Kobe as well. Is that correct?
No, I heard about Antaiji in the vicinity of Kyoto, but Antaiji itself is about 200 kilometers from Kyoto. It's on the coast of the Nihonkai, the Japanese Sea.
Okay.
Actually, it takes about 4 or 5 hours with the train to the next train station. From there, you have to take 30 minutes with the bus, and then you have to walk for another hour because the bus stop is 5 kilometers from the temple. So it's quite in a remote area.
So when you enter a temple like this, can you describe a little bit what is a day like as a maybe apprentice monk?
We get up, or when I was there, we got up at 3:45 in the morning. And from 4 to 6, you meditate for 2 hours. At 6 is breakfast. And after that, cleaning of the whole premises. That takes until after 7 or so. There's a short break. And from 7:30 until noon, there is agricultural work. So Antaiji is special in that it has no parish. Most temples in Japan have a parish and they do ceremonies for this parish. Antaiji has no parish, but instead of that, they try to be self-sufficient. So Antaiji grows its own rice, its own vegetables, and for heating we have wood. So we cut the trees in the mountains, do wood chopping until noon. At noon there's lunch and 1 hour break, and then from 1 until 3 or 4 in the afternoon, again there's physical work. And at 5, dinner, and from 6 to 8, another 2 hours of meditation. So altogether 4 hours of meditation, and then from 8, it's free time, but the next morning starts at 3:45, so most people go to rest pretty early.
So the meditation kind of frames a little bit the day to
Exactly.
start and close out.
Exactly. The 2 hours before the sun rises and the 2 hours after the sun sets are kind of reserved for meditation.
You mentioned that there are different schools in Zen, Soto and Rinzai, and also in terms of meditation, there are many different ways to practice meditation.
Yes.
Vipassana comes to mind, but there are others. What kind of meditation do you practice at Antaiji?
In Japanese, it's called shikantaza, which means just sitting. So the special thing about this type of meditation is there's no extra, no plus alpha. So sometimes people in my tradition say Zen isn't meditation in the first place, because meditation you do after you adjust the posture, you adjust the breath, and then you start to meditate. While we would say you adjust the posture, you adjust the breath, and the work is already done. There's nothing extra to do. That's all, basically.
So you just sit there.
Zazen. You just sit. But that, of course, is the most difficult thing, because we usually tend to always do something extra, or you sit there and you ask yourself, what am I supposed to do now? This can't be all. And that's, in Japanese, there's this word koan. It's a kind of problem, a question you're faced with. How can you possibly do nothing? Because you always want to do something. And even this doing nothing is something that you try to achieve, and you can't achieve it.
And then your thoughts start going somewhere and you
Exactly.
have to bring them back, but that's also an action in a way, right?
In a way, yeah. Or kind of, especially in Vipassana meditation, you observe But then you play that observer. And in Zen, of course, it's also important that you're aware of what you do, you're conscious, but you try to not have this distance. So we talk a lot of becoming one with the sitting. Or it's not that I who sits here, I meditate, but I let Zazen, which is Japanese for the sitting meditation, I let Zazen do Zazen. So I take myself out of the equation. It's not that I observe, I'm aware, I'm mindful, but I just allow reality to be. But still, it's not a state of just dreaming. So that's kind of the difficult thing. We tend to either take ourselves out of the equation and start to dream or fall asleep, or we're always kind of like hotel detectives, like I need to be mindful. Am I still sitting straight? And it's somewhere, well, neither this one nor the other one. That's what makes just sitting quite difficult.
So after you experienced meditating back in school in Germany and then finally coming to Japan and being at a temple where you get to practice daily, did you feel like this was what you came looking for, or was there anything that surprised you or was different than what you expected?
Oh, lots of surprises and disappointments. For one thing, the physical labor was much harder than I'd expected. I mean, it sounds beautiful to grow your own rice and vegetables, but it's quite hard when you actually have to do it on rainy days, on snowy days. So the physical aspect was hard for me. And also I had this idea in my mind, if I live in a Japanese monastery for 2 years, 3 years, maybe 5 years, I will get this enlightenment that all the books talk about. But I didn't really feel that I'm getting closer to it. And when I asked my teacher in the monastery, when can I expect to get this enlightenment? He says, well, you will never get it. You will never get it. But that's why I came for, and that's why I studied Japanese in university. And so that was another disappointment. Another thing is that's something that you find everywhere in Japanese society. You have this senpai kohai system. So when you enter a company or monastery or school, you enter at the bottom. And if somebody has entered half a year before you, 1 year before you, well, they tell you what to do. And in a monastery, sometimes these people are younger than you, or they have no less ideas about Buddhism than you have. So it's difficult for you to respect that person. Or you would, like in German, you would discuss things with that person on eye level. But that's not expected from you in Japan. In Buddhism, we talk about of letting go of yourself. And that's one of the examples where it's required in daily life, but well, with that person, I don't want to let go of my own ideas, because the ideas that person has, they often don't sound so convincing. So that was difficult for me as well, this kind of respecting the senpai. Cooking in the kitchen would be another example. That's also in Zen, it's not only about meditating on the cushion. Cooking in the kitchen, working in the fields is all part of meditation. And for Japanese, food is maybe the most important part of the day. Eating 3 delicious meals a day, in the morning, at lunch, in the evening. While in Germany, often you eat bread in the morning, bread in the evening, and maybe stew at lunch.
The Butterbrot.
Yeah. It's more important that you have a car, you have a good, nice house. It's not about what you ate. While in Japan, it's what about you eat, even in the monastery. So you have to learn how to cook, and you have to learn to cook in a way that pleases the Japanese. But at that time, in the early 1990s, in Germany, I'd never heard about udon. Now they're quite popular in Germany and all over the world. But at the time, I didn't know about udon. So when I was told to make udon for lunch, I made them, spaghetti al dente style. And they were too hard for the Japanese taste. So the next day I decided I'll make them really soft, and I cooked them for 30 minutes and they dissolved. And I got criticized for that again. And being criticized for my failures in the kitchen every day, I finally said, well, sorry, but I didn't come to Japan to learn how to cook. I came here to study Buddhism and practice Zen. And when my teacher heard that, he said, it's not about you. It's not about you. And a year or 2 years before that, when I had first arrived as an exchange student, the first question that he had asked me was, why have you come to Antaiji? And at that time, I'd also said, well, to learn about Buddhism. And at that time, he had said, this is not a school. You create Antaiji. You create Antaiji. And I was 22 at the time. I could hardly speak Japanese. But that's what he said. And then 2 years later, standing in the kitchen, he says, it's not about you. So what? I thought it's about me. I thought it's all about me.
Which one is it?
Exactly. And that was also a hard, koan problem to deal with. I create Antaiji. I'm supposed to create Antaiji, but it's not about me. How do I deal with that? So it was not a walk in the park.
Eventually, though,
Yeah.
you became the abbot,
Yes.
the head of Antaiji. So you did build Antaiji in a way.
In a way, yes.
Was there a moment when you decided, throughout all these hardships, I'm staying here. I'm gonna continue working on this place and contribute a little bit more? Because you said earlier that you initially thought you'd come for a couple of years to study Buddhism and then you may go somewhere else. But you stayed for quite a long time.
Yeah, for some reason I thought I have no alternative. If I don't make it here, I won't make it anywhere. So, of course, it's often said there's many ways leading up the same mountain. But you have to decide for one way. If you say somewhere in between, this way seems to be a little bit too steep for me, and you look for another way, probably you get stuck there again. If you don't carry through with that one way, probably you won't carry through with any way. For some reason I thought, well, if I don't carry through here at Antaiji, where should I go? Where should I go? In theory, of course, I could go back to Germany, I could go back to university, I could become a scholar, whatever. But I thought, well, I have to do this one thing that I decided for. It just, somehow it felt like that, even when I was desperate at times.
How was it like becoming the abbot? Is there a ceremony? Is there a special procedure where you basically take over the leadership of the temple?
Yeah, I mean, there are procedures, there are certain requirements. Like I was 25 when I formally ordained as a monk in Antaiji, and I went through certain stages. There are certain ceremonies that you have to do so you become qualified to take over a temple. At the beginning, I thought I would eventually go back to Germany and start some kind of Zen center in Germany. And at age 33, I left Antaiji with the idea that eventually I would go back. But before that, I thought I would start a Zen center in Osaka, because there are many Zen temples in Japan, but few where you can really practice. So I thought I would open some kind of Zen center in Osaka. And at the time, there were a lot of homeless people living in the parks all over the city. And as I had no money to rent a place, I decided to also live in the park, close to Osaka Castle. And after 6 months living there and practicing Zen every morning and inviting people to sit with me, my teacher had an accident while shoveling snow in the winter, and he died. And at first it wasn't clear who's going to become his successor, but then people decided, well, let's ask Muho to do it. So in 2002 I became officially the abbot, and of course there were lots of both formalities to do and ceremonies to do, but it wasn't such a big thing. Or basically, well, I became the new abbot because there was no other candidate, so to speak.
So what is the role then of an abbot at the temple? Do you have new responsibilities then that you take on top of contributing to the daily tasks?
Well, basically you have responsibility for the whole monastery, for the temple, for the people that live here. If people want to ordain them, you become their teacher. So you have the spiritual role of guiding them in their practice. You have also to make sure that there's enough to eat during the winter. So you also have to make sure that there's some kind of income, but there's no parish. So you have to make sure that, well, people, sometimes you go on takuhatsu, which is collecting alms. You have to organize things like that. Basically, well, you're the head of a one-man company, and people come in and out. And in the beginning, I was the only person who stayed there. So you have to answer the phone, you have to greet guests. I had to do everything. I had to make sure that there's gonna be 3 meals on the table. And when people stay for longer, you kind of work them in. And hopefully when they stay for a couple of years, then you can concentrate on only, well, the leading tasks. But especially during the first couple of years, I had to do everything, basically.
But you finally kind of passed from the kohai to the senpai, where
Yes.
you were in a position of also educating, teaching, sharing.
Yes.
Did that change your perspective on Buddhism and Zazen to go from the learner to the teacher?
Yes, sure. So what you described, going from kohai to senpai, that also happened during the first 8 years before I became the abbot. This change in perspective is, at first, it's all about your problem. You wanna, in my case, I want to know the meaning of my life. I want to solve that problem. But the more you move into that senpai role, it's not about you. What my teacher told me then, the kitchen is not about you. So it's more about the people around you. So in Buddhism, you could say it's a shift from a more Theravada-like perspective. How do I free myself from suffering? Then the Mahayana perspective, which is how can I help all living beings, even if I should become the last to enter nirvana? How can I help others first? And that's basically your role as an abbot. Then it's not about you anymore, literally.
Not about you. Do you have any fond memories from teaching, or someone that came to the temple and you kind of rediscovered something in Zen while practicing with that person that came to Antaiji, or exchanging new experiences?
Fond memories. I mean, the most beautiful thing is, I mean, in Zen, there's the saying, Zen mind is beginner's mind, which is a famous phrase by a Japanese Zen master who lived in San Francisco, Shunryu Suzuki. He wrote this book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And nobody would start on this way, walk this path, without this beginner's mind. You want to solve a question and you want to invest your life into this. I would claim of myself, when I came to Antaiji for the first time at age 22, I had this beginner's mind. But then it becomes kind of a daily life. And the monastery becomes your home. When you become the abbot, it's more like a job. Then the beautiful thing about people coming there, they still have this beginner's mind. You rediscover you see your young self in there, and it helps you to also keep the flame in you alive. If it would be only you, and I married when I became the abbot, so if it would be only me, my wife, the children, it would be just some kind of family business. But each of these people that came either from inside Japan or from outside Japan, I saw exactly this, that they often had sacrificed everything. That was their vision, and that was always, well, inspiring for me.
Do you notice when talking with people from outside Japan and Japanese people both interested in Zen Buddhism, that there are maybe different perspectives, different understanding of essentially the same thing?
Yes, certainly. Like I told you about these two things that my teacher said to me. At first, you create Antaiji, and then later it's not about you. And for me, these are kind of the pillars, the founding stones of his teaching. And I try to communicate that to my students as well. Each of you has to create Antaiji, but it's not about you. And another thing that I often told them is you have to grow like cucumbers. In Antaiji, when we grew the cucumbers, we let a piece of thread hang down and plant the small cucumber in the spring under that thread, and it would somehow climb by itself. If it only would have enough water and some nutritions in the summer, you would have delicious cucumbers. And the metaphor stands for, well, the student that grasps the teaching of the Buddha by himself and grows according to that teaching. And I sometimes had the impression that my Japanese students were more like tomatoes, which are also delicious in the summer, but that one piece of thread is not enough. They need a firm construction, and you have to tie them to the construction every couple of days. You have to protect them from the rain. So the Japanese students, they need a lot of attention. And Japanese are usually very good at, well, forgetting themselves, adjusting to the others. They listen to their senpai. So there's not much conflict, but there's not much initiative or ideas. I would want to do it like this or that. And with the Westerners, it's often the other way around. So they are not like tomatoes and also not like cucumbers, rather like pumpkins, I would say. In the beginning, they look like cucumbers, but they grow all over the place. And if you don't take care, they will kind of kill their neighbors. If you grow cucumbers, you have to, well, have 1.5 meters, 2 meters in between them so that they don't fight with each other. So the cucumbers, it's all about them. I create Antaiji, but they forget themselves. And it would be nice to have something in the middle, which is the idea of the cucumber. But the Japanese, they're good at forgetting themselves, but less about I create it. I take responsibility for the whole place. We in the West, we want to take initiative, responsibility, but then we make it all about ourselves.
But then when you have them all together, it creates kind of a very interesting experience, right?
Yes,
because you get the best of both worlds too.
Exactly. But it can also be painful because people clash with each other.
Are there very different ideas of Buddhism and what Buddhism should be when you are at the temple and basically studying the same text and studying the same meditation, where you say that there will be clashes, but is it usually related to basically the ideological things of, oh, we should practice this way or we should meditate this way, or is it more unrelated to the core of what happens at Antaiji?
I wouldn't say it's ideological related to Buddhism. But culture plays a role. Like for Japanese, if it had been done like that last year and 2 years ago and 3 years ago, then we do it the same way this year. While for Westerner, it's but why? But why? This year, why don't we change things? So a lot of conflict came out of this, that Westerners always wanted to try new things, while the Japanese wanted to stick to tradition. And I had to, try to somehow balance both. I don't want to stick to the old ideas, but if you always try new things, especially I stayed there then for 30 years, but a lot of people, they have new ideas, but then 3 months later they are gone. So if you have a new idea, you also need that commitment. that comes with that. And often people had a lot of interesting ideas, but they lacked the commitment. So then I'd say, well, maybe we do it the way we used to do it last year.
And kind of stick to what we can do and what we can keep doing for longer.
Exactly.
Buddhism has a long history in Japan and kind of plays a big role today in society, but still when we see some service done on the Japanese society and we ask people if they're when I say we, I mean like newspapers and such are making polls and ask people if they're religious, most of them say no.
Yes.
But then they will make Buddhist practice and Shinto practice for births, for weddings and such. What is the role today of Zen Buddhism in Japan?
Zen Buddhism in Japan is one of maybe a dozen schools. And the everyday role of a Zen priest is just the same as that of a Pure Land priest or Shingon priest. That means conducting funeral service, conducting memorial services, taking care of a temple that's usually 300-400 years old. Apart from that, and that's why I 20 years ago thought I would start a Zen group in Osaka. Apart from that, it's hard to find Zen temples where you can actually go and say, I want to practice meditation with you. Because most Zen priests don't practice meditation. They do cater for, well, the Butsudan in the family. You have the small altar where the deceased person have their memorial plates. So priests visit the homes of the members of the parish. They take care of the graveyard. That's what the parish expects from them. That's their main job. While Shinto caters more to everyday aspects of life, like children or good fortune. And interestingly, a lot of Japanese, when they marry, it's neither Buddhist nor Shinto, but it's Christian chapel where they marry. So, as you said, they say, I'm not religious, but actually they practice a lot of religious stuff. And I sometimes use the metaphor of a table where a Japanese meal is served, and there's lots of small plates. And some of the dishes are sweet, some are salty, some are more sour. You eat all of these. But I sometimes have the feeling that there's no main dish. So if you ask a Japanese what's really supporting your life, or what do you really believe in, it's kind of fuzzy, or maybe there's really nothing. Although all of these side dishes are consumed. While in the West, it's usually the opposite. You have one religion. Or you have no religion, but even then, you kind of
have an ideology.
Exactly. So I'm an atheist, you should also become an atheist, because who would be so stupid to believe in a god? Or who would be so stupid to believe in rebirth? While the Japanese, they're completely open in that. They don't really believe in a special god, but they would also never deny the existence of God. If you ask a Buddhist priest, is there really something like rebirth? Probably most of them would say, well, I don't know. Let's wait until we die, we will see. At least that's the answer that I usually give, and it's a typical Japanese answer. I don't really know. In the scriptures it says yes, but who knows?
Let's wait and see and find out.
Exactly.
You stayed at Antaiji, you said, for 30 years.
Yes.
That's a very long time, a long commitment,
Yes.
where you've been able to work, improve, and pass on your knowledge. But eventually you decided to leave it, and now you live in Osaka and you run a Zen group by Osaka Castle on Sundays where you practice. What spurred that decision to decide to leave your life at the temple behind and kind of come back into the city?
Well, one thing, there are lots of factors. Antaiji, the history of the temple is not so long. It's about 100 years. And I was the 9th abbot. So every 10 to maybe 15 years, the abbot changed. And I felt it's quite good that you don't stay the abbot for 30 or 40 years, but that every 10, maybe 15 years, there's a fresh person. So 4 years ago, I had been the abbot for 18 years, and nobody until then had been the abbot for so long. So that was one thing. I'd been the abbot for quite some time, and finally there was a student of mine, a Japanese nun, who had grown like a cucumber, and I felt, well, she could do the job. Actually, when I had proposed to my wife, when I became the abbot, she had asked me, she came from Osaka, she wasn't so enthusiastic about going to that mountain temple. She asked me, how long are you going to be the abbot? And I said, well, at least 10 years, maybe 15. And when it was 18 years, she kept asking me, well, what happened to these initial 10, 15 years? And also, we're 3 kids. The older 2 were just entering high school, and it's quite far from the monastery to the high school. It's impossible to go there in the winter. So that was another factor in deciding the family is going to move back to Osaka. And as I had been the abbot for 18 years, I said, well, I'm going to move with you. And I'm going to entrust Antaiji to my student. Her name is Eko, and she's doing a great job now. She's the first woman in the history, the first abbess. And I don't regret it. Sometimes I'm asked, well, but life in the city must be stressful. But no, I love life in the city as well. But of course, the life there in the mountains was beautiful as well.
So how do you maintain now your practice and your teachings in the city when you're maybe not in a temple with people that have ordained, people that come to practice? How do you find your kind of Zen space here?
Actually, I don't feel the need to reserve a special time of the day for practice anymore. Basically, for me, the whole day is practice. But of course, the Sundays a Zen group, we meet at 6:30 in the morning and sit together for 1 hour. That's kind of something that also helps me stay grounded. And on Mondays, I teach Zazen online. Until last month, I actually taught Zazen online 5 times a week. I sometimes get invited by people, by temples also, to teach Zen there. But it's much less than in Antaiji. In Antaiji, had on the average 5 hours a day where I would just meditate. And now I would say maybe it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It's much less. But I don't feel the need so much anymore.
When you teach your classes online, maybe now to a wider audience and people that are willing to come all the way to the temple, do you notice maybe misconceptions about Zen, people that come looking for something that is not really there? As you were saying, you initially went there with like, I want to find my enlightenment, and your teacher said, you will not find it. Is this still the most common misconception about Zen?
Maybe. I mean, people expect something. It's the same with, I don't know, mindfulness, yoga practices. You want to get something from the practice. And of course, there are lots of beneficial results. But you still have this feeling, but there must be something more. And that was probably the point of my teacher saying, you won't find it here. It's about letting go of this idea. I need this enlightenment, whatever. I need it. I want it. But if you didn't have this, you wouldn't practice in the first place. So in a way, it's important to look for this special thing that you can't even name. But then at one point, you need to let go of it again. And that's very hard because you invested so much time and money and effort into chasing this big enlightenment, whatever. That when you're told to let it go, how can I possibly let it go now?
So much effort, much effort wasted, right?
Exactly. But then once you let it go, it's a great liberation. Wow. Yeah. It's great liberation when you let it go.
Is there a way to know if you're practicing the right way? So if I take myself as an example, some days I'll be stressed and I'll come home and before going to bed, I'll do 10 minutes of meditations, try to sit still. either do nothing, sometimes listen to like guided meditation or something like that. But I never feel like I am achieving anything. I feel like my mind is just bouncing around like a ping pong ball, and I cannot calm my thoughts. I cannot focus on the breathing. Does this go away by doing it for a longer period of time and little by little? Or is there a way to know that we do something right, we do something wrong?
As long as you have the feeling, I'm not doing it right. As long as you have this feeling, something is not right here, I would say you're not doing it wrong. Probably every meditation teacher has made this experience. You ask people to, for 3 minutes, just watch their breath. And then you asked, after this 3 minutes, could you do it? And probably more than half will tell you, no, even 3 minutes was impossible. But then there's a few who say, no problem, 3 minutes, only breath. But usually that's the people that are hard to save, because nobody, especially in the beginning, can stay focused on his breath for 3 minutes. But we fool ourselves into thinking, I'm doing it right. So if you practice every day 10 minutes before sleep and it's still a mess, good for you that you have this realization. Like a Dogen, who's probably the most important figure in my tradition in the Soto school, he said enlightenment means to awaken to illusion, not from illusion. That would be easy to understand. Now I'm deluded, but one happy day I'm gonna awaken from delusion and then it's gone. He says you awaken to delusion, you see how deluded you are. And the metaphor for that is the shadow of the pine tree gets darker and darker the brighter the moon shines. And the pine tree stands for you. The moon is Satori, enlightenment, but it shines from behind. What you see is delusion. You see the thoughts coming up. And you wonder, after all these years, how come that they don't get less? Well, that's because the moon shines. So, hearing what you say, I would say, good for you. Good for you that you don't think you got it. You're enlightened. Because there's so many people out there who think they took some mushrooms, whatever, and they think, now I'm enlightened. I realized I don't exist in the first place. And I can only say, well, sorry for you.
So it's just an acceptance of that. That's just how it is. Those are my thoughts in that moment.
Although when you say I accept it, that's another danger. So that's just the way I am. That's the way it's supposed to be. Then, in a way, you're already congratulating yourself on that delusion. So it's important to stay in this uncomfortable zone that something isn't right, but not trying to make it right, but also not accepting in the meaning that, oh, maybe it's right. Maybe the fact that I feel it's not right makes it right. No, you stay in this uncomfortable place. It's not right. But as long as you stay there and it's uncomfortable, but that's good. And the moment you say, well, maybe it's not supposed to be right in the first place. Maybe we're all just deluded beings. Just look at my neighbor. He's even more deluded than me. So who cares? No. You try to make it right, but you can't make it right, and you stay aware of the fact that it's not right. And you stay there in that uncomfortable place. And I think that's where the whole thing happens. Practice happens, and in Soto we say practice actually is manifestation of enlightenment. We don't practice so that we get enlightened in 10 years, in 20 years, or maybe in the next life. But the moment you practice, that's manifestation of enlightenment. The moment you see how imperfect you are, you see that because of the light of enlightenment, but you don't congratulate yourself on that. You don't say, well, it's okay that I'm deluded. And as long as you don't say that, it's okay. But the moment you say it's okay, it's not okay anymore.
For people that are kind of just discovering Buddhism, Zen, are getting interested, or maybe are coming from not the religious side, but just meditation, some of these ideas can sometimes be difficult to understand. And like, what are we talking about? A few years ago, I went to Myanmar and I stayed at a monastery in Pi Nulin in the north of the country.
Yes.
And they practice Vipassana meditation under Theravada Buddhism.
Yes.
And it was meditation from 4 a.m. mostly until like 8 p.m. with just 2 breaks for lunch.
Yes.
When I arrived at this monastery, the abbot said, okay, what you're going to do is you're just going to focus on your breath, on the point where the air flows in and out of your nose, and you do nothing else. Every time your mind goes away, and doing that for 10 hours a day, for someone who's never done it, impossible. And I was just sitting there and watching the monks seem so focused, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I was doing this right or not. And now a few years later, when I still practice, sometimes I still don't know what I'm doing. When you have people come to you that want to learn, that want to get started, what kind of advice do you give them to not maybe feel overwhelmed by all the ideas, the religious aspect of things, and the difficulty of practice? How can they start and kind of commit and keep doing this consistently without being overwhelmed?
Taking one step after the other. In the case of Zazen, sitting one period and not thinking about the dozens of periods that still lay ahead of you. For example, also in Antaiji, we have these retreats where we sit 15 periods a day and that 5 days in a row. And when on day 2 you start to calculate how many periods are still ahead of me, you can't take that. So you sit one period at the time. When you're the cook, you cook one meal at a time. And when it overwhelms you, let it overwhelm you. That's part of the practice in a monastery is structured that it must overwhelm you. That's the point. Let it overwhelm you. And then you're overwhelmed, and that's it. That's also good, even though it doesn't feel good. It feels uncomfortable. You don't want to be overwhelmed. You want to be in control. But the daily life in the monastery takes that feeling of being in control away from you. You can't even control your own mind for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. You can't even focus on this area under your nose.
So just be overwhelmed.
Yes.
And not think about the next steps. Just think about the step that you're in right now.
And I mean, the nice thing of living in a monastery, it's possible to just think about lunch when you're supposed to make lunch. While if you're living in secular society, what about the bills that I have to pay? What about the kids? So that's a privilege of living in the monastery. You can, when you're overwhelmed, just be overwhelmed and think only about this one period of Zazen. You don't have to think about tomorrow, unless you're the abbot. Then you have to think
run
about
the
bills. Yeah, you have to pay the bills. Yeah.
Our society is changing at a very fast pace, and we talked before about how maybe in Japanese society, a lot of people don't identify directly with the religion, and how some people want to keep traditions, some people want to bring in new ideas. How is Zen, or how do you manage to keep Zen kind of in balance between all the new changes happening around you and kind of the traditional aspect of it?
10 years ago, there was a book that was written by one of my Antaiji senpais, which the title of this was Updating Buddhism. And it was quite a bestseller at the time in Japan. So usually Buddhists don't have this idea that Buddhism needs to be updated. But at least it needs to be kept fresh. And I personally don't think that this meditation practice needs to be changed. But it needs to be kept fresh. But keeping it fresh means basically that you practice it daily. And I don't try to missionize others. So I don't tell other Buddhist priests you should meditate more. But I want to continue with my, Sunday group. I want to do what I do also on YouTube, on Zoom. And I hope that will keep the flame burning. I don't think that adjustments are really needed. Updating something, for me, just means, to keep the flame burning. Keep it alive.
Keep it running, keep it going.
Exactly.
You just mentioned your YouTube channel,
yes.
Muho Nölke,
yes.
Where you share and you explain Buddhist teachings and texts. How did that get started? What was the interest between, I'm going to make a video, because you post every day.
Yes.
That's a lot of big commitment too, right? Something that you've been doing for a long time.
Yeah, actually, when I was still the abbot of Antaiji, I had these two channels. One for the monastery, where I would share kind of short 1 minute, 2 minute clips of monastery life with people that had come maybe in the past, or people that supported the temple but never were there. And I had my own personal channel for my family in Germany, where they could see pictures of my children. And the Antaiji channel still exists, but when I moved to Osaka, I used my personal or family channel to, express myself, say things that I thought might be interesting. And I started with the daily videos about 3.5 years ago, when Corona started, and I had planned to go back to Germany for a trip and do meditation retreats, give talks, and that couldn't be realized. So I thought for the 3 weeks of that trip, I would give daily talks on YouTube. But then the feedback was so good that I continued for more than 3 years. So by now I have over 1,000 videos, and I enjoy it. And a lot of my viewers seem to enjoy it. So that's also something that keeps me reasonably busy now, giving these talks.
You get a lot of questions from your viewers.
Exactly, yeah.
Are there any questions that you see, this questions comes back again and again and again, although you've answered it already?
Yeah, I mean, one popular question is, what is enlightenment? Like, for example, I say, as my teacher said, you won't get it. I even claim of myself, I'm not enlightened. But then the question is, but the Buddha said he was enlightened. There must be enlightenment. So that's one popular one. Like, what is enlightenment? How can you be a Buddhist teacher and say you are not enlightened? Another thing is, in Zen, it said that you need a teacher, that the teacher is important. But a lot of people, maybe because in the West we're so individualist, they say, why can't I do it on myself? The Buddha found enlightenment without a teacher. Why should I commit to a teacher? And there's also teachers that want a lot of your money, or that abused you. How can I be safe that my teacher will never abuse me? So how do I find the right teacher, or why do I need a teacher in the first place, is another one. Then about the sitting postures, you sit in lotus posture. Some people sit in lotus posture, you don't have to, but how important is the posture? Why do you have to sit in lotus posture? Why can't you just sit on the sofa? The Buddha taught the middle way, and lotus posture sounds quite painful. Wouldn't it be the middle way to sit on the sofa? Dealing with pain, like in Zen, we sometimes say when you sit, just accept everything as it happens. You hear some sounds, there's thoughts coming up, and you, for example, you feel pain. You just let the pain be. But there must be a limit to that. You don't want to hurt yourself. Where's the limit? That's also another quite popular. So
those keep you engaged every day.
Exactly. Well, sometimes you say, I already answered that, but sometimes you try to answer it in a new, different way. Yeah.
When you look back at your experience now,
yes.
30 years Antaiji and now in Osaka,
yes.
Did you find what you were looking for besides enlightenment?
Yes. I'm totally content. I wasn't. When I was in my mid-20s, I was desperate. Sometimes I wished I'd never been born in the first place. And now I feel it's great to be here. I'm thankful to be alive. And I never felt that until my late 20s or so. And I think it has something to do with my Zen practice. Feeling totally at home here. And I never felt at home where I was. I always wanted to be somewhere else, somebody else, sometime else. And now I'm totally happy to be this person in this moment at this place.
If some of our listeners are interested now into learning more about Zen, and what would you recommend them? Are there books that they should seek out, or maybe your YouTube channel if they speak German, where they can find information, resources, and maybe get started with their journey?
Yeah, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind is a very good book that I already mentioned by Shunryu Suzuki. There are many books on Zen, I guess. I have also 2 English channels on YouTube. They're not as popular as the German one, and I don't update them daily. But there's some material there in English as well. I would say, well, search for yourself. Search for yourself. There's so many, teachers, so many books also on YouTube. I imagine there's lots of channels by YouTube teachers. Check them out. Find out for yourself. Of course, also Antaiji is open to foreigners. So if you want to go to a retreat there, there's 3 annual retreats that are open to everybody. If you want to visit Japan, check out Antaiji.
One question I haven't asked yet
is
about your name, Muho.
Yes.
That's your Buddhist name?
Yes.
Is this a name you choose? Is it the name that is given to you? And what does it mean?
Usually when you ordain as a monk, the name is given to you by your teacher, but in Antaiji it's the other way around. So the teacher tells the student, it's your decision, you want to become a monk, so you choose your own name. And the meaning of Mu is nothing, and Ho means, in my case, direction, so no direction. And I found that in the Buddhist dictionary, part of the reason why I chose it is because a lot of my senpai had these beautiful names like cloud of compassion or the mind of wisdom. But if you have a name like that, you have to live up to it. But if your name is no direction, that's quite easy to to stay faithful to that. And of course, no direction doesn't mean that you have no orientation. It also means that you're open, like the sky. You're open in all directions. And of course, I can't claim that I'm faithful to that all the time, but at least that's my aim, to stay open.
We covered a lot of topics today. Talked about your journey to Japan, what you did at Antaiji, what you're doing now here in Osaka. Do you feel like there's something important that we haven't covered that you would like to share about? Could be a favorite Buddhist concept, could be an experience that you've had here in Japan that you'd like to get back to and share with the audience.
Maybe one thing, like we talked about the daily schedule in the monastery, we also talked about the retreats. Probably it was pretty similar in Myanmar than in Japan when you have these intensive retreats. The reason why we have these retreats is basically you put all of the suffering of life into 5 days or 7 days. It's like compressed suffering. And in my experience, it was usually the 3rd day that was the hardest. The first day you can still make it. The second day you still have some motivation. But then the 3rd day, especially when you think about the time that's still ahead of you, you get desperate. And often it felt to me like I'm dying. And as a kid, I asked myself why I was born. Kind of. That was my question. And I was sometimes suicidal. But in that situation, I feel I'm dying and I don't want to die. But there's no way out, except you can shift your legs a little bit, or sometimes you grind your teeth, you take a look at the watch. You're not supposed to do that, but it's still 5 minutes. Okay, I can do that. But if you don't want to cheat, you don't want to look at the watch, you don't want to move your legs, it seems impossible to do that. So at one point I asked my teacher, always the third day, that's the limit. I can't make it beyond that without cheating. It feels like I'm dying. And my teacher said, but where's the problem? We have a graveyard behind the temple. There's still space for you. And well, I thought it was a joke, but at one point, at one time during a retreat, I told myself, okay, let's, how do you say? In German, we would say drauf ankommen lassen.
Let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens. So in the worst case, I'm gonna be buried here in the mountain. But I'm gonna die anyway. I don't wanna go back to Germany in this desperate state. Maybe it's a beautiful place to be buried. So this time on the third day, I'm not gonna grind my teeth anymore. I'm not gonna shift my legs. I'm not gonna peek at the watch. Let me die here. I'm just gonna sit totally relaxed and wait until I die. And then it became easy. And then that was the first time I felt, wow, I'm still alive and it's beautiful. Until then it was like, I'm alive, but why? I'm alive, but where's the compensation for that? I didn't ask to be born. Where's my compensation? And the moment I thought, okay, now I'm gonna die, and I noticed, but I'm still living, I'm still sitting here. That's kind of where things changed.
The turning point.
Exactly.
Who are those retreats for? Is it for everyone, or should people be prepared before
You
going?
should be prepared. Like in Antaiji, we never asked people to first, consult with their psychotherapist. Sometimes people in the West do that because if you have problems with psychosis or trauma, it might not be the best idea to do a retreat like this. So I would love to say it's for everyone, but you need to be prepared. You need to be also mentally solid to a certain degree. And of course, a certain desperation is also helpful, but it needs to be helpful desperation.
Thank you, Muho.
Thank you for having me.
For sharing your story and sharing your experience with Buddhism here in Japan. It was very interesting for me, and we'll make sure to put a lot of links in the description so people can find resources about Antaiji. People can find your work, your book, which you've written as well.
Well, they are German books and Japanese books, but I think there's nothing in English yet.
Well, you may have some German listeners
Okay.
or Japanese listeners who are interested.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming and sharing your time with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.
Thank you.